The afternoon sun sat low over Maple Grove, turning the windshields in the school pickup line into a slow ripple of light. It was the kind of calm, ordinary weekday that never makes the news. Which is exactly why what happened next felt so wrong. Because when Ms. Elena Rivera, a kindergarten teacher who'd spent the last 8 hours tying shoelaces and wiping glue off tiny hands, pulled away from Oak Hollow Elementary, she had no idea a patrol car had already decided she was a problem. Not because she'd done anything, but because someone thought she looked like someone who might. And in the next few minutes, one bad assumption would turn into a chain of decisions that almost ruined her life, until a single object in her glove box changed everything. But we're not there yet. Not yet. Because first, you need to understand who Elena Rivera was, and why her calmness in the face of what happened would end up being the most important detail of all. Elena didn't look like a threat. She looked like what she was, a teacher. Her hair was pulled back with a pencil stuck through the bun, her cardigan still dusted with chalky fingerprints from a day of writing letters on the whiteboard. She drove a modest gray sedan that always had stickers on the back window, some cheerful, some slightly crooked, gifted by children who wanted their teacher to remember them even after summer break. Inside the car, there was a faint smell of hand sanitizer and apple slices. A class photo was taped to the dashboard, and in her tote bag, slumped over the passenger seat, were a stack of worksheets labeled Letter M, a half-finished attendance report, and a small gift bag that read, "Thank you for being my teacher." Elena had stayed late because one of her students, a little boy named Caleb, had been struggling. Not with schoolwork, Caleb was bright, but with everything else. Some days he arrived quietly. Some days he arrived angry. Some days he arrived with a bruise he couldn't explain. Today he arrived with a look in his eyes that told Elena, in the simplest language children have, something at home wasn't right. So after dismissal, Elena spoke with the counselor. She filled out a report the way teachers are trained to do, carefully, factually, with no emotion, because emotion can be used against you. By the time she left the building, most of the other teachers were gone. The pickup line had thinned. The parking lot felt spacious and empty. And as Elena pulled out, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. That's when she saw the patrol car. At first, it was just headlights behind her, hanging back. Not unusual. This town was full of patrol cars that liked to idle near the school at dismissal. But then the car followed her when she turned. And then it followed her again. Elena didn't speed. She didn't weave. She didn't do anything that would draw attention. Which is why, when the red and blue lights suddenly flashed behind her, her first thought wasn't fear. It was confusing. She signaled and pulled into a nearby grocery store lot, stopping beneath a street lamp that hadn't fully switched on yet. Her hand stayed on the wheel the way every teacher learns to keep them, visible, calm, non-threatening. The officer didn't approach right away. He sat in his cruiser for several seconds, watching. Then he stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with that rigid posture that made some people feel safe and others feel small. His name tag read, H. Dalton. He approached Elena's driver's side window slowly, one hand resting near his belt. Elena lowered the window halfway. "Good afternoon, officer," she said, voice steady. "Is everything okay?" Officer Dalton didn't respond to the greeting. Instead, he leaned down slightly and looked past her shoulder, scanning the inside of the car like he was expecting to find something dangerous tucked between crayons and tote bags. "License and registration," he said. Elena nodded and reached slowly into her purse. She knew the routine. Teachers were trained for routines. She handed him her license first. Dalton took it and stared at the name. Elena Rivera. His eyes flicked back up to her face. "You live on Pinecrest?" he asked. "Yes," Elena said. "Just a few blocks from the school." "School?" Dalton repeated. "I teach kindergarten at Oak Hollow," she said, trying to sound friendly, neutral. "I just left." Dalton looked back into the car again, this time focusing on the passenger seat, where the tote bag sat open with papers spilling out. "What's in the bag?" he asked. Elena blinked once, surprised. "Just worksheets. Lesson plans." Dalton straightened. His jaw tightened. "You know why I stopped you?" he asked. Elena's stomach did a small, cold drop. No, she said. I don't. Dalton stared at her for a second too long. You failed to come to a complete stop back there. Elena turned her head slightly, glancing behind her, replaying the last few blocks in her mind. The stop sign? She'd stopped. She always stopped. She was the kind of person who stopped even when no one was around. I'm pretty sure I stopped, she said carefully. Dalton's eyes narrowed as if pretty sure was an insult. Step out of the vehicle, he said. Elena froze. Officer, is there something else? Step out, Dalton repeated, louder this time, like volume could turn uncertainty into guilt. Elena swallowed, opened her door slowly, and stepped out into the fading afternoon. She kept her hands visible, palms open, the same way she taught her kids to show they weren't hiding anything. Dalton positioned her near the trunk of her car, angled her slightly away from the open door. Any weapons in the vehicle? He asked. Elena almost laughed, but she didn't. It wasn't funny. No, she said. Of course not. Dalton looked at her like her answer wasn't enough. Any drugs? Anything illegal? He asked. No, Elena repeated, now more firmly. I'm a teacher. Dalton's mouth tightened at that. Teachers can carry drugs too, he said. Elena's eyes widened. I'm sorry, what? Dalton took a half step closer. That's when Elena noticed something. Not what he was saying, but how he was saying it. He wasn't asking questions like someone looking for clarity. He was asking questions like someone looking for confirmation of a conclusion he'd already reached. Elena's pulse quickened, but she didn't raise her voice. Officer, she said, is this about my car? Is something wrong with the registration? If you tell me what's going on. Dalton cut her off. Put your hands on the trunk. Elena stared at him. Hands on the trunk. A couple walking into the grocery store slowed down, their eyes drawn toward the patrol lights reflecting across the pavement. Elena felt her face burn. Her first instinct was to explain, to reason, to prove she was normal. But the second instinct, the one teachers develop after years of dealing with conflict, told her something else. Do not escalate. Do not give them a reason. Stay calm. Stay factual. So she placed her hands on the trunk. Dalton patted her down quickly, methodically, more aggressive than necessary. Elena flinched when his hand brushed the side of her ribcage. Please, she said, voice tight, I'm not comfortable with. Dalton paused, his head snapping toward her. You want to make this difficult? He asked. Elena held her breath. No, she said quietly. I want to understand. Dalton moved toward the open driver's side door, peered inside again, and then, without asking, reached in and grabbed her tote bag. Elena's eyes widened. Officer, that's my work bag. Dalton dumped it onto the passenger seat, papers sliding everywhere like fallen leaves. Then he reached for the center console. Officer, Elena said, sharper now, what are you doing? Dalton didn't answer. He flipped the console open, rummaged through it. Found nothing. He checked the cup holders, the side pocket, the back seat. It was like he was searching for something specific. But every time he didn't find it, the tension in his shoulders grew. Elena stood still, hands still on the trunk, watching her life be turned inside out. And then Dalton stopped. His gaze fixed on something near the glove compartment. Elena followed his eyes. The glove box. Dalton stared at it like it was a locked safe. Open it, he said. Elena blinked. What? Open the glove box. Elena swallowed. Officer, may I ask why? Dalton's head turned slowly. His eyes were cold now. Because I said so, he replied. Elena's heart thudded. She could feel the grocery store couple still watching. She could feel another car slowing near the entrance. She could feel the humiliation, the kind that makes your ears ring. But she could also feel something else. A small, controlled certainty that this wasn't right. Officer, Elena said carefully, I'm happy to cooperate, but I'd like to know what probable cause you have to search my car. Dalton's face tightened like a fuse had been lit. You want to talk about probable cause? He said. You want to pretend you know the law? Elena didn't pretend to know. She did know. Not because she was trying to be difficult. Because teachers had to know things now, What to do if a parent threatened you, what to do if police asked questions on campus, what to do if a child disclosed abuse, what to do when you're required by law to report it. And today, just hours earlier, Elena had filed a report that would start a process involving social workers, police, and the courts. She knew how systems worked. She knew how quickly a misunderstanding could turn into a record. And she knew, deep down, that Officer Dalton was pushing this because he believed she wouldn't push back. Elena breathed in. Then she said something that, in the next chapter, would change the tone of this entire stop. "I'm going to comply," she said, "but I'm also going to document this interaction." Dalton's head snapped toward her. "What did you say?" Elena didn't reach for her phone. She didn't move suddenly. She simply met his eyes and repeated, calm and clear, "I'm going to comply, and I'm documenting this interaction." Dalton's expression shifted. Not to fear, but to annoyance. Like she'd broken an unwritten rule. Then he said something that made Elena's stomach drop even lower. "You got something in there you don't want me to see?" he asked, nodding toward the glove box. Elena shook her head, genuinely baffled. "No." Dalton took a step closer. "Then open it." Elena looked at the glove box. And for a split second, she remembered what was inside. Not because it was illegal, but because it was unexpected. The kind of thing you don't expect to matter, until suddenly it's the only thing that does. Her fingers trembled slightly as she moved toward the passenger door. Dalton watched her like a hawk. Elena opened the passenger door slowly, leaned in, and placed her hand on the glove box latch. She hesitated for half a breath. Then she pulled. The glove box fell open. And Officer Dalton's entire posture changed instantly, like someone had flipped a switch in his spine. Because sitting right on top, clearly visible, was something Dalton hadn't expected to find in a kindergarten teacher's car. Something that made his face drain of color. Something that made him take a half step backward without realizing he'd done it. Elena saw his eyes lock onto it. And in that moment, she realized he hadn't stopped her for a stop sign. He'd stopped her because he thought she was someone else. And now, he was starting to understand what a mistake that was. But what exactly was in the glove box? And why did it hit Officer Dalton like a punch? Because sitting right on top, clearly visible, was something Dalton hadn't expected to find in a kindergarten teacher's car. Something that made his face drain of color. Something that made him take a half step backward without realizing he'd done it. Elena saw his eyes lock onto it. And in that moment, she realized he hadn't stopped her for a stop sign. He'd stopped her because he thought she was someone else. And now, he was starting to understand what a mistake that was. For a beat, neither of them moved. The grocery store parking lot hummed with ordinary life. Shopping carts clacking, distant car doors shutting, a child laughing somewhere near the entrance. Yet the air around Elena and Officer Dalton felt locked in a glass box. Dalton's eyes stayed fixed on the object inside the glove box. Elena followed his stare. It wasn't a gun, drugs, or anything dramatic like that. It was a thick, official-looking credential holder, the kind that folded open with clear plastic sleeves. Next to it was a sealed envelope stamped with the words, "County Family Services, Confidential." And beneath the envelope, partially visible, was a laminated card with a bold title that read, "Mandated Reporter, Education Professional." The credential holder itself had a small emblem on the front, an embossed seal, worn slightly from being handled. Dalton swallowed. His throat bobbed, subtle, involuntary. Elena hadn't put those things there to intimidate anyone. They were simply where she kept important papers she needed quickly, documents she didn't want lost in her work tote. But Dalton didn't see it that way. To him, it looked like evidence. Evidence not of crime, but of something else. Of paperwork that carried weight. His eyes shifted from the credential holder to Elena. Then back to the glove box. Then back to Elena again. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice lower than before. Elena blinked, still leaning into the car. "Get what?" Dalton pointed, not with a finger, but with his entire rigid hand, as if he didn't want to get too close. "That," he said. Elena's chest tightened. "My teacher credential? That's not... I'm employed by the district." Dalton's jaw clenched. "Elena Rivera, he said, reading her license again, like maybe the letters had changed. Yes, Elena said. Dalton leaned in closer, just enough to see what was printed inside the folded credential holder. Elena watched his eyes scan, and she saw the exact moment something in his expression shifted from suspicion to calculation. Because inside, beneath the clear plastic, was her district badge, photo, name, school, ID number. And behind it was something else. A second credential card. Not law enforcement, not a badge, but a county-issued access credential that allowed certain professionals, teachers, counselors, school staff, to interface with protected child welfare systems. And on that card was a phrase that meant very little to most people, but meant something specific to someone like Dalton. Authorized coordinator, child safety reporting. Dalton's lips parted slightly. Child safety reporting, he repeated, as if tasting the words. Elena straightened slowly from the open passenger door. Officer, she said, calm but firmer now, I need to ask again, why are you searching my car? Dalton's eyes flicked past her, toward the grocery store entrance, toward the people staring. He didn't like the audience. Elena noticed he subtly shifted his body to block their view, like he wanted privacy back. Someone called in a suspicious vehicle near the school, he said. Elena's brow furrowed. Near the school? Dalton didn't answer directly. He looked at her again, then asked, You were at Oak Hollow today? Yes, Elena said. I work there. Every day. Dalton's eyes hardened again, but not with confidence. With irritation. Because her answer didn't solve his problem. It made it bigger. Elena could feel the gears turning behind his eyes. She also noticed something else. His earlier aggression wasn't fading. It was being replaced. Not with an apology. With strategy. Step away from the vehicle, Dalton said suddenly. Elena froze. Why? Step away. Elena did, slowly, moving back toward the trunk. Dalton reached into the glove box and pulled out the credential holder and the sealed envelope. Elena's heart spiked. Officer, she said, sharper now, that envelope is confidential. Dalton held it up, turning it slightly like he was checking for something. I can open it, he said. Elena's stomach turned cold. You can't, she said, and this time her voice wasn't just calm. It carried authority. That's protected information. It contains child welfare reporting details. Dalton's eyes narrowed. So now you're telling me what I can and can't do. Elena met his stare. I'm telling you the law. Dalton's nostrils flared. And then he did something that revealed his real fear. He looked toward his cruiser. Then very subtly he clicked his radio mic. Elena heard the static burst. Unit 12, he said, voice clipped, requesting additional unit. Possible situation. Elena's eyes widened. Officer, why are you calling backup? Dalton didn't look at her. For my safety. For your safety? Elena repeated, disbelief creeping into her voice despite her best effort. Dalton kept the envelope in his hand, like it was proof he'd found something dangerous. Then he glanced at Elena again and said quietly, almost like a warning. You want to keep this simple? Tell me what's in here. Elena's hands clenched. It's not about what's in there, she said. It's about who it's about. And you don't have a right to... Dalton stepped closer, cutting her off. Listen, he said, voice low now, dangerous in its calm. People who get pulled over don't get to lecture me. Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. She could feel her throat tightening, not from fear of him, but from fear of the consequences of what he was doing. Because Elena knew something Dalton didn't. And it was sitting in that sealed envelope. Elena had filed a report that afternoon. Not a casual report. A serious one. The kind that triggered a chain reaction. The kind that, once filed, had a clock attached to it, deadlines, procedures, follow-ups. The kind that could implicate adults with power if mishandled. And now an officer who had stopped her under shaky pretenses was holding it in public, threatening to open it. Elena forced her voice steady again. Officer Dalton, she said, I am asking you to put that envelope back. If you believe you have cause, call your supervisor. Dalton's eyes flashed. You think you're special because you teach 5-year-olds? he snapped. Elena didn't flinch. I think you're making a mistake. That was the sentence that turned Dalton's irritation into something sharper. And pride, in situations like this, is gasoline. Dalton took a step back, raised his voice so the onlookers could hear. This driver is being uncooperative, he announced. Elena's eyes widened. I'm not uncooperative. I opened the glove box. I'm cooperating. I'm just asking. Dalton cut her off again, louder. I asked what's in the envelope. Elena's face flushed. People were definitely watching now. A man pushing a cart slowed. A woman near the entrance stopped, phone already lifted slightly like she was deciding whether to record. Elena could feel the humiliation rising again. But she refused to break. Officer, she said, that is a confidential county document. I'm legally required to keep its contents protected. Dalton's eyes narrowed. And I'm legally required to investigate suspicious behavior, he replied. Elena shook her head. Holding a confidential envelope doesn't make me suspicious. It makes me a teacher doing her job. Dalton stared at her. Then his lips curled in a small, ugly smirk. You know what I think? He said. Elena didn't answer. I think you're hiding something, he said. Elena's heart sank. This was the moment when logic stopped matching. When the story in Dalton's head, his assumption, became more real to him than the truth. He moved toward Elena's car again. Elena stepped forward instinctively. Officer, do not open that. Dalton stopped and turned slowly, his expression cold and deliberate. Or what? He asked. Elena swallowed. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have power like he did. But she did have one thing he didn't expect. Recorded evidence. And she had one more thing she hadn't used yet. Elena reached into her cardigan pocket, slowly, clearly. Dalton's hand twitched near his belt. Elena raised her phone, screen already lit. I'm recording, she said, voice steady. Dalton's face tightened. Turn that off, he ordered. I'm allowed to record in public, Elena replied. Dalton stepped toward her. I said turn it off. Elena didn't move. I'm not interfering. I'm documenting. Dalton leaned close, lowering his voice again, like he didn't want the audience to hear this part. You want to keep your job? He murmured. Elena froze. The words landed like a slap. Elena's eyes widened. Dalton's gaze was hard, almost bored, like he'd said this kind of thing before. Elena swallowed, forcing herself not to react emotionally. Are you threatening me? She asked quietly. Dalton's mouth twitched. I'm telling you how this works, he said. Elena's hand tightened around her phone. And in that moment, Elena made a decision. Not to fight him physically, but to fight him the way systems fight back. With escalation. Okay, Elena said, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. Then I want your supervisor here. Now. Dalton's eyes flashed. He didn't like that. Because calling a supervisor meant paperwork. It meant oversight. It meant he couldn't control the narrative. But Elena wasn't done. She took a slow breath and said the one phrase that, in this town, carried more weight than any badge on Dalton's belt. I also want a district representative, she added. Dalton's brow furrowed. I what? Elena met his eyes. Oak Hollow is part of the Maple Grove School District. I am a district employee. If you are going to search my property and handle protected documents, the district will be notified. Dalton stared at her like she'd spoken a language he hated. A language of policy. Of accountability. Of people above him. And then, just as Elena finished speaking, a second patrol car turned into the parking lot. Its lights weren't on yet, but it rolled toward them with purpose. Dalton's radio crackled again. And then a voice came through, tinny and impatient. Unit 12, status? Dalton pressed the mic. Driver is refusing to cooperate, he said. Elena's eyes widened. That's not true. Dalton ignored her and continued. Possible involvement with child services, unknown content. Elena's stomach twisted. He was framing her. Setting the stage. Elena raised her phone slightly, ensuring the camera captured Dalton, the envelope, the credential holder. And she said, clearly into her recording. For the record, Officer Dalton searched my car without explaining cause, removed a confidential child welfare envelope and is threatening to open it. Dalton's face tightened sharply. The second patrol car stopped behind Dalton's cruiser. A shorter officer stepped out, female, with a no-nonsense stride. Her name tag read, Kim. Officer Kim approached, eyes scanning the scene. She saw Elena's hands, the phone, Dalton holding the envelope. And her expression changed slightly, not to anger, but to caution. "Dalton," she said, "what's going on?" Dalton straightened, as if relieved to have an ally. "She's being difficult," he said. "Suspicious vehicle report near the school. She's got child services documents in the glove box." Officer Kim looked at Elena. "Ma'am?" Elena's voice was steady. "I'm a kindergarten teacher. I was leaving work. I opened my glove box at his request. That envelope is confidential." Kim's eyes narrowed slightly at the word confidential. Then she looked back at Dalton. "Why are you holding it?" she asked. Dalton's jaw tightened. "Because she's acting like she's above the law." Kim didn't seem impressed by that. She extended her hand slightly. "Dalton, give it to me." Dalton hesitated. Just half a second. But Elena noticed. And that hesitation told her something important. Dalton wasn't worried about Elena anymore. He was worried about what another officer might realize. Dalton handed the envelope to Kim reluctantly. Kim examined the stamp. "Confidential." She looked at Elena. "Is this a mandated report?" Elena nodded. "Yes." Kim's posture shifted, subtle but immediate, because mandated reports weren't casual paperwork. They were serious. Mishandling them wasn't just unprofessional. It was illegal. Kim looked at Dalton again, her tone sharper. "Did you open it?" she asked. Dalton shook his head. "Not yet." Kim's eyes hardened at the word yet. Elena watched as Officer Kim's gaze moved to the credential holder, still in Dalton's other hand. Kim reached for it. "Dalton," she said, voice firm, "hand me that too." Dalton bristled. "Kim, I've got this." Kim didn't blink. "No," she said. "You don't." She took the credential holder from him, opened it, and read. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough that Elena felt a shift in the air. Kim looked back at Elena, her voice calmer now. "Ms. Rivera," she said, "you said you're a kindergarten teacher at Oak Hollow?" Elena nodded. "Yes." Kim glanced back at Dalton, then at Elena again. "Have you filed any reports today?" Kim asked. Elena hesitated for the smallest moment. Then she said carefully, "Yes." Dalton's face tightened. Kim's eyes sharpened. "Was the report about a student?" Kim asked. Elena swallowed. "Yes." Kim's gaze flicked to Dalton again, now with a look that wasn't just caution. It was suspicion. Because if Elena had filed a report, then Dalton's sudden interest in her glove box wasn't just a random search. It could be interference. Kim's radio crackled. A new voice came through. "Supervisor en route. Need 2 minutes." Kim didn't take her eyes off Dalton as she spoke. "Good," she said quietly. Dalton's jaw clenched so hard Elena could see the muscle in his cheek jump. And then Kim said something that made Elena realize the stop was about to become something else entirely. "Dalton," Kim said, "step back to your unit." Dalton snapped his head toward her. "What?" Kim's tone was firm, unmistakable. "Step back," she repeated. "Now." Dalton hesitated again. And this time, the people watching noticed it too. Because the moment an officer hesitates when another officer gives an order, it tells everyone something is wrong. Dalton finally stepped back toward his cruiser. Kim turned to Elena. Her voice was lower now, protective. "Ms. Rivera," she said, "keep your phone recording. And don't answer any more questions until the supervisor arrives." Elena's breath caught. Because that wasn't what you told a guilty person. That was what you told someone who was about to get caught in a power play. Elena nodded slowly, heart pounding. And then, in the distance, another vehicle turned into the lot. Not a patrol car. A dark SUV with county markings. It pulled in fast, too fast for a normal visit. Elena's eyes narrowed. Kim's posture stiffened. And Dalton's face went pale again. Because the SUV door opened, and a man stepped out wearing a jacket with letters across the chest that made the entire situation snap into focus. CPS investigations. He looked straight at Elena first, then at Officer Dalton, then at the confidential envelope in Kim's hand. And he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Which one of you opened a protected report?" Elena's stomach dropped, because that question meant only one thing. The report Elena filed wasn't just routine. It was urgent. And now, somehow, Officer Dalton had walked straight into the middle of it. But why did CPS show up here? And what exactly was in that report that would make an investigator drive into a grocery store parking lot like it was an emergency scene? The man in the CPS jacket stood beside the dark SUV like he'd stepped out of a different world, one where paperwork wasn't paperwork, where the wrong signature or one careless disclosure could set off alarms. He looked straight at Elena first, then at Officer Dalton, then at the confidential envelope in Officer Kim's hand. And he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Which one of you opened a protected report?" For a moment, the parking lot went quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Even the grocery store's automatic doors seemed to pause mid-swish. Officer Kim tightened her grip on the envelope. "No one opened it," she said quickly. "I have it secured." The man nodded once, like he'd heard that answer 100 times, and like it wasn't enough by itself. "Good," he said. "Keep it sealed." Then he looked at Elena again, his eyes sharper now, not suspicious, focused. "Ms. Rivera?" he asked. Elena's throat felt dry. "Yes." He stepped forward, stopping at a respectful distance. "I'm Daniel Price. CPS investigations." Elena's stomach churned. CPS didn't usually appear in grocery store parking lots. Not like this. Not with urgency written in their stride. Price glanced at her phone. "You recording?" Elena nodded. "Yes." "Keep recording," Price said, without hesitation. Officer Dalton, standing near his cruiser, stiffened like someone had just slapped him with a legal document. "What is this?" Dalton snapped. "Why is CPS here? This is a traffic stop." Price turned his head slowly toward Dalton, eyes cold and calm. "This isn't your traffic stop anymore," Price said. Dalton's jaw clenched. "Excuse me?" Price didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Officer," he said evenly, "we have an urgent child safety matter tied to a mandated report filed today by Ms. Rivera. And I'm here because the system flagged an attempt to access that report outside protocol." A ripple went through the small crowd. It was subtle, one person shifting their stance, another raising a phone higher, but Elena felt the energy change. Dalton's face tightened. Attempt to access? Nobody accessed anything. Officer Kim cut in sharply. "He removed it from her glove box," she said, voice clipped. "And he said he could open it." Dalton snapped his head toward Kim. "Kim." Kim didn't flinch. "You did." Price's gaze stayed on Dalton, unblinking. "You removed a confidential mandated report from a teacher's vehicle during a roadside search," Price said, stating it like a fact in a report. "And threatened to open it." Dalton stepped forward. "I was conducting an investigation." Price held up a hand. "Not aggressive. Just final. Mandated reports are protected," Price said. "The details inside are restricted for a reason. Unauthorized access can compromise an investigation and endanger a child." Dalton's eyes flicked toward the onlookers. Elena noticed it. He didn't like how this sounded in public. He cleared his throat. "Look, I got a call, suspicious vehicle near the school. Her car matched the description. I did my job." Elena's heart thudded. Matched the description. That phrase again. The excuse that could stretch to cover anything. Price turned to Elena, voice gentler. "Ms. Rivera, did you file a report regarding a student at Oak Hollow today?" Elena hesitated. She knew confidentiality rules. She also knew she was being recorded in public. "I filed a mandated report," she said carefully. "Yes." Price nodded. "Did you receive a follow-up call from CPS?" Elena blinked. "No." Price's jaw tightened slightly, Like that confirmed something he suspected. Officer Kim stepped closer to Elena, angling her body subtly between Elena and Dalton. Dalton's nostrils flared. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I'm being treated like a criminal." Price didn't even look at him when he replied. "Officer Dalton," Price said, "we have a child at risk. And right now, the bigger question is, why were you so interested in that envelope?" The words landed heavy. Dalton's head snapped up. "I wasn't interested in the envelope. She was acting suspicious." Kim's voice turned hard. "She asked about probable cause. That's not suspicious." Dalton's jaw ticked. Price glanced down at the credential holder Kim still held. "Ms. Rivera's credentials confirm she's authorized to file and coordinate reporting," he said. "So again, officer, why the glove box?" Dalton's eyes shifted. Just for a fraction of a second. To Elena. Then away. That tiny movement, quick, involuntary, was all Elena needed to know. Dalton wasn't mad about being questioned. He was scared about what Price might connect. Because the truth was, Elena had noticed Dalton before. Not today. Not during the stop. But earlier. At school. It had been brief. Easy to miss. But Elena didn't miss it. Around midday, a police officer had come onto campus. Not unusual. Officers visited schools sometimes. Safety talks. Meetings with administrators. But this officer hadn't gone to the front office like a normal visitor. Elena had seen him near the hallway by the counselor's door, standing with his arms crossed, scanning faces, scanning doors. At the time, she didn't think much of it. Teachers are used to adults moving through schools. But now, looking at Officer Dalton across the parking lot, Elena felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. It was him. And if it was him, then this wasn't random. Price spoke again, voice steady but urgent. "Ms. Rivera, I need you to listen carefully," he said. "Without sharing details of the report, tell me one thing. Is the subject of your report connected to law enforcement in any way?" Elena's breath caught. She felt Officer Kim glance at her sharply. Dalton stiffened like a wire pulled tight. Elena swallowed. Her mind flashed to Caleb. Small hands, quiet eyes, a bruise he claimed came from falling, the way his shoulders curled inward like he was trying to take up less space in the world. And then her mind flashed to the comment Caleb had made that made Elena's stomach twist hours earlier. He'd said it casually, like it was normal. "My mom says we have to be extra good when he comes over, because he gets mad if the house is loud." Elena had asked gently, "Who is he?" Caleb had shrugged. "The police guy." Elena's mouth went dry now. She looked at Price and said carefully, "There may be a connection." Dalton's face drained again. It wasn't dramatic. Just enough that his skin lost warmth. Price's eyes hardened. "That's what I thought," he said quietly. Officer Dalton's voice rose, sharp, defensive. "This is nonsense. You're turning a stop into some conspiracy." Price finally turned his full body toward Dalton. "Then you won't mind if we preserve the evidence?" Price said. Dalton frowned. "What evidence?" Price nodded toward Elena's phone. "Her recording." Dalton's face tightened. "She can't record me." Officer Kim snapped. "She absolutely can." Price continued, "And your body cam footage." Dalton's hand twitched toward his chest. Elena hadn't noticed until now. Dalton's body cam was mounted, small, black, blinking. And suddenly Elena realized why Dalton had hated the idea of being recorded. Because there was already a camera. And if his story didn't match his actions, it would be right there. Price's voice remained calm. "Supervisor is on the way, yes?" Kim nodded. Less than a minute." Price glanced at Dalton. "Good. Because until they arrive, you are not to open, handle, or discuss this report. Understood?" Dalton scoffed. "You can't order me around." Price's expression didn't change. "I can document interference. And I can request an immediate injunction through county council if necessary." Dalton stared at him, chest rising and falling. Then, in a move that looked like compliance but felt like defiance, Dalton took 2 steps backward toward his cruiser. And Elena saw it, the shift in his posture, the way his hand moved near the door handle. He wasn't just stepping away. He was positioning, like someone deciding whether to retreat or to control the scene before control was taken from him. Officer Kim noticed too. Her voice sharpened. "Dalton, stay where you are." Dalton glanced at her. "I'm going to my vehicle." Kim took a step forward, matching his movement. "This is a hold," she said, "until the supervisor arrives." Dalton's eyes flashed. "You can't detain me." Kim's jaw set. "Watch me." The tension snapped tight enough that Elena felt her hands tremble, even though she kept her phone steady. And then, just as Dalton's fingers curled around the cruiser door handle, a third vehicle rolled into the parking lot. A marked supervisor unit. It stopped with purpose, door opening fast. A man stepped out, mid-40s, graying hair, command presence. His uniform was crisp, his eyes sharp. Sergeant's stripes on his sleeve. His name tag read, Marshall. He took one look at the scene, the crowd, Elena recording, Kim holding the envelope, Price standing firm, and his face tightened like he already knew this was going to ruin someone's week. "What the hell is going on?" Sergeant Marshall demanded. Dalton spoke immediately, eager, voice loud. "Sergeant, I initiated a traffic stop based on a suspicious vehicle report near Oak Hollow. Driver became uncooperative, had child services documents." Marshall held up a hand. "Stop." Dalton froze. Marshall's eyes moved to Kim. "Kim." Kim spoke clearly. He searched her vehicle without articulating cause, removed a confidential CPS envelope, and threatened to open it. CPS investigations arrived because the system flagged potential unauthorized access. Marshall's gaze snapped to Price. "You are Daniel Price." "CPS investigations," Price said. "We have an urgent case linked to a report Ms. Rivera filed today. There's reason to believe law enforcement connections may exist to the subject." Marshall's face hardened. That last part was the match thrown into gasoline. Marshall looked at Elena. "Ma'am," he said, voice controlled, "what is your name?" "Elena Rivera," she said. "I'm a teacher at Oak Hollow." Marshall nodded. "Are you recording?" "Yes." "Good," Marshall said, and Elena's breath caught, because he wasn't angry about it. He turned back to Dalton. "Dalton," Marshall said quietly, "do you have your body cam on?" Dalton's jaw tightened. "Yes." Marshall's eyes narrowed. "Has it been on continuously since the stop began?" Dalton hesitated. Just half a second. But in that half second, everybody saw it. Kim's eyes sharpened. Price's expression went flat. Even the crowd shifted. Because a hesitation on that question meant only one thing. Marshall's voice turned ice cold. "Dalton," he repeated, slower, "answer the question." Dalton swallowed. "There may have been an interruption." Marshall's eyes didn't blink. "An interruption." Dalton's voice tightened. "It's possible it buffered." Kim snapped. "That's not how body cams work." Dalton whipped his head toward her. "Kim." Marshall cut him off. "Enough." He took one step closer to Dalton. Not aggressive, authoritative. "Officer Dalton," Marshall said, "you are being relieved of field duties pending review. Hand me your keys." Dalton stared at him like he'd misheard. "What?" Dalton barked. Marshall didn't flinch. "Now." Dalton's face reddened. "This is insane. I did my job." Marshall's voice stayed calm. "If you did your job, you have nothing to fear." Dalton's nostrils flared. His hand hovered at his belt. Not reaching for a weapon, reaching for control. Then he did something small, something subtle, that most people wouldn't have understood. But Elena did. He looked at the CPS envelope in Kim's hand again. Like he was thinking about it. Like he was calculating whether he could still influence what happened next. Price saw it too. And that's when Price said the sentence that turned the entire scene from a messy traffic stop into a full-blown investigation. "Sergeant," Price said, "I need you to understand. If Officer Dalton is connected in any way to the subject of Ms. Rivera's report, then this stop may constitute interference with a mandated report." The crowd murmured. Marshall's eyes narrowed, slow and heavy. He looked at Elena. "Ms. Rivera," he said, Did you see Officer Dalton on campus today? Elena's breath caught. She hadn't planned to say it out loud. But the truth was already pressing against the surface. Yes, Elena said. I saw him near the counselor's hallway. Around lunchtime. Dalton's face turned ash-white. Marshall stared at him. Dalton, he said quietly, were you on school property today? Dalton's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like he was trying to decide which lie would hurt less. Finally, he said, I drove past. Marshall's voice was deadly calm. That's not what she asked. Dalton's eyes darted. And Elena realized something that made her stomach twist even harder. Dalton hadn't just guessed she had paperwork. He'd known. Or suspected. Because he'd been there. He'd been close enough to know something happened today. Close enough to want to stop her before that report went where it was supposed to go. Marshall took a slow breath, like a man trying not to explode in public. Then he pointed at Dalton's cruiser. Step away from the vehicle, Marshall ordered. Hands visible. Dalton's eyes widened. Sergeant. Now. Dalton obeyed, stiff and angry, stepping away. Marshall turned to Kim. Secure that envelope. Get it out of here. Kim nodded, moving toward Price. Price took the envelope carefully, like it was evidence in a crime scene. Which, in a way, it was. And then Marshall looked at Elena. His voice softened, just slightly. Ms. Rivera, he said, you did the right thing recording. Stay right here. Do not leave. You're not in trouble. Elena's knees felt weak. She nodded, swallowing hard. And in that moment, as Marshall began issuing instructions, Elena realized the object in her glove box hadn't just changed Dalton's attitude. It had exposed him. Because that glove box didn't contain contraband. It contained accountability. But there was still one question hanging like a storm cloud over everything. Why did Dalton care so much? And what was he trying to stop? Price looked at Marshall and said, voice low but urgent. The child in that report may be in immediate danger. We need to move. Marshall's eyes narrowed. Move where? He asked. Price's jaw clenched. To the address on the report, he said. And we need to do it now, before anyone tips them off. Elena's heart dropped. Because if Dalton had been trying to interfere, then someone else might already know. And somewhere, a little boy named Caleb might be waiting in a house that suddenly felt very, very unsafe. Price looked at Marshall and said, voice low but urgent. The child in that report may be in immediate danger. We need to move. Marshall's eyes narrowed. Move where? He asked. Price's jaw clenched. To the address on the report, he said. And we need to do it now, before anyone tips them off. Elena's heart dropped. Because if Dalton had been trying to interfere, then someone else might already know. And somewhere, a little boy named Caleb might be waiting in a house that suddenly felt very, very unsafe. Sergeant Marshall didn't waste time arguing. His eyes flashed to Officer Kim. Kim, ride with Price, he ordered. Get that report to County Council and move on to that address. Kim nodded once. Yes, Sergeant. Marshall turned back to Elena. His voice softened, but his face stayed serious. Ms. Rivera, you did the right thing, he said again. But I need you to stay here with a statement officer. Someone will take your report in full. Elena's chest tightened. Caleb, she whispered before she could stop herself. Price heard her. He looked at her, and for the first time since he arrived, his expression showed something like humanity breaking through procedure. We're going to him, Price said. Right now. Elena nodded, swallowing hard. Marshall turned sharply to Dalton, who stood rigid near his cruiser, hands visible, jaw clenched like a man swallowing fire. Dalton, Marshall said, you are not to speak to anyone. You are not to use your phone. You are not to contact any unit. Do you understand me? Dalton's eyes flared. Sergeant, this is... Marshall cut him off. Do you understand me? Dalton's shoulders lifted with a tense inhale, then he forced out, yes. Marshall stared at him for a beat, then signaled to another officer who had arrived quietly during the commotion. Officer Bennett, Marshall said, stand by Dalton. If he moves, you move. If he speaks, you document. If he touches his phone, you take it. Bennett nodded. Understood. Dalton's face went gray. The crowd was fully engaged now, phones raised, whispers spreading. Elena felt the weight of all those eyes, and it would have been overwhelming if not for the one thought looping in her mind. Please be okay, Kale. Please be okay. Price and Kim moved fast toward the SUV. But just before they reached the vehicle, Dalton suddenly lifted his chin and called out, loud enough for the crowd to hear. This is all because she got offended, he shouted, voice tight and angry. I stopped her for a reason. Officer Bennett stepped closer instantly. Officer Dalton, stop talking. Dalton ignored him, eyes fixed on Elena. You think you're some kind of hero? You teachers? Enough. Sergeant Marshall barked, stepping forward like a thunderclap. Dalton's mouth snapped shut. Marshall's voice dropped low, dangerous. One more word, he said, and you'll spend the night explaining it to internal affairs. That did it. Dalton fell silent, still rigid, still furious, but silent. Price got into the SUV. Kim followed. The engine started. And as they pulled away, Marshall spoke into his radio, voice clipped and command-heavy. Dispatch, notify County Council and Internal Affairs. Possible interference with mandated report. Priority. Elena closed her eyes for half a second. It was happening. The system, slow, frustrating, imperfect, was actually moving fast for once. Because when you bring a child into it, things change. And because a kindergarten teacher had the courage to keep calm, record, and insist on procedure. The truth was about to catch up to someone who thought he could bend rules without consequence. But what Elena didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Dalton's interference had already set something else in motion. Something they'd only discover when they reached the address on the report. Price drove with urgency but not recklessness. Kim sat in the passenger seat, phone in hand, coordinating. County Council is looping in a judge for emergency orders, she said. We have a case number. Price nodded. Good. Any units nearby? Kim listened to her radio, then replied. The closest unit is 5 minutes out. Price tightened his grip on the steering wheel. 5 minutes can be an eternity. They turned onto Willow Ridge Drive, a quiet suburban street with trimmed hedges, basketball hoops, and the kind of houses that looked safe from the outside. That's how it always was. You never saw the danger until you stepped inside. They pulled up to a tan house with a neat lawn and a small plastic swing set out front. Price checked the address against the sealed report in his mind. He'd been briefed enough to act, but not enough to violate confidentiality. Kim glanced at the house. No vehicles in the driveway. Price's eyes narrowed. That's not a good sign. They stepped out. Kim spoke into her radio. CPS investigations on scene. We need a unit ASAP. Price walked up the driveway, alert but controlled. No shouting. No running. Just the kind of tense focus you see in people who've done this too many times. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again harder. Still nothing. Kim tried the doorbell. Silence. Price glanced through a front window. The living room looked staged. Too clean. Like someone had scrubbed the story out of it. Kim whispered, "Do we have legal authority to enter?" Price's jaw tightened. Emergency child safety exception applies if we have reason to believe imminent danger. Kim looked toward the swing set. Then toward the empty driveway. Then toward a small backpack lying near the porch. Her expression sharpened. That backpack, she murmured. It was tiny. Kindergarten-sized. Price crouched, examined it without touching too much. A name tag on the side read, Caleb. Kim's breath caught. Price stood slowly. He's supposed to be here, he said quietly. Kim's hand tightened around her radio. And then, from the side of the house, they heard it. A faint sound. A soft, muffled thud. Like something heavy being moved. Price and Kim locked eyes. Kim whispered, "Back door?" They moved along the side path quickly, careful not to make noise. The backyard was fenced. The back door was closed. Price placed a hand on the knob. It unlocked. That was all the confirmation he needed. Because if everything was fine, why would the house be empty, except the door unlocked, and the child's backpack outside? Price opened the door slowly. The smell hit first. Not something obvious like smoke. Something sharp. Cleaning products. Too much of it. Covering something else. Kim's voice was tight. "Caleb," she called, loud enough to be heard but not loud enough to startle. No answer. They stepped in. The kitchen counters gleamed. Too clean. And on the kitchen table sat an open bottle of disinfectant wipes. As if someone had been in the middle of wiping fingerprints away. Price moved toward the hallway. Kim followed, radio ready. The house felt empty, but not unoccupied. Then Price stopped abruptly. He pointed at the floor near the hallway. There were faint marks. Not footprints. Drag marks. Kim's face tightened. They followed the marks down the hall to a closed door. Price placed his hand on it. The doorknob was cold. He pushed. The door opened. And there, sitting on the floor in the corner, was Caleb. His knees hugged to his chest. His face streaked with dried tears. A small red mark on his wrist like someone had grabbed him hard. When he looked up and saw Elena wasn't there, when he saw strangers, his body flinched. Kim knelt, voice gentle. "Hi, Cale. You're okay. We're here to help." Caleb didn't move. Price scanned the room. The closet door was slightly open. Inside, he saw a folded blanket and a pillow on the floor. Like someone had been keeping Caleb in there. Kim's voice broke slightly as she spoke softly. "Sweetheart, can you tell me where your mom is?" Caleb's lips trembled. He whispered, barely audible. "She left." Price's eyes narrowed. "Left where?" Caleb swallowed hard. Then he said the sentence that made Kim's head snap up like she'd been shocked. "She said we have to go before the police guy gets mad." Kim's eyes went wide. Price's jaw tightened. Because that meant only one thing. Someone had already tipped them off. Someone connected to law enforcement. Someone who knew a report had been filed. And someone who wanted them gone before CPS arrived. Kim's voice was sharp now, controlled but urgent. "Price," she said quietly, "we need units now." Price nodded, eyes scanning. Then he spotted it, on the nightstand near the bed. A phone. Screen lit. A recent missed call notification. From a contact name that made Price's stomach go cold. H. Dalton. Kim leaned closer, reading it too. Their eyes met. No words needed. They both understood what this meant. Dalton hadn't just been careless. He was connected. Back at the grocery store parking lot, Sergeant Marshall was already on the phone with Internal Affairs. But when his radio crackled with Kim's voice, his entire posture shifted. "Marshall," Kim said, voice tight, "we located the child. He was confined. Household appears staged. There's evidence of prior warning." Marshall's brow furrowed. Prior warning? Kim hesitated for half a second, just enough to signal the weight of what she was about to say. "There's a missed call on the caregiver's phone," she said. "From Officer Dalton." Silence. Then Marshall's voice dropped. "You're sure?" "I'm looking at it," Kim replied. Marshall's face hardened into something Elena would later remember as the look of a man watching someone destroy their own career in real time. He turned toward Dalton slowly. Dalton was still standing near his cruiser, tense, trying to look bored, trying to look unbothered. But when Marshall's eyes hit him, Dalton's expression flickered. Like he already knew. Marshall walked toward him. The onlookers hushed instinctively, sensing the air change. "Dalton," Marshall said quietly, "turn around." Dalton blinked. "Sergeant, what is this?" Marshall's voice was iron. "Turn around." Dalton's face tightened. "I didn't do anything." Marshall didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He simply repeated, "Turn around," and nodded at Officer Bennett. Bennett stepped forward. Dalton's chest rose and fell quickly. For the first time, Elena saw real fear. Not fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being caught. Dalton took a step back instinctively. Bennett matched him. Dalton's voice rose. "This is a setup. She's recording and now CPS is." Marshall's voice snapped like a whip. "Enough." Dalton stopped talking. Marshall leaned in slightly, voice low and deadly. "CPS found the child confined," he said. "And they found your call on the caregiver's phone." Dalton's face drained. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. Marshall straightened and spoke clearly, loud enough for the crowd and Elena's recording to capture. "Officer Dalton, you are being detained pending internal affairs and county investigation." Bennett moved in and cuffed him. The click of the handcuffs sounded loud in the open parking lot. Dalton's shoulders tensed and he jerked slightly. "I want a lawyer," he snapped. Marshall nodded once. "You'll get one." Dalton turned his head toward Elena, eyes blazing. "This is your fault," he spat. Elena's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She held her phone steady. And she said, calm and clear, the way she spoke to children who were losing control. "No, officer," she said quietly. "This is because of your choices." The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, "Wow." Someone else said, "Good." A woman near the entrance muttered, "Finally." And that's when Elena understood why these stories go viral. Because people aren't just watching a conflict. They're watching the moment the world feels fair again. Even if it's just for a minute. Hours later, after Elena gave her statement, after CPS completed the emergency removal and ensured Caleb was safe, after County Council initiated an emergency protective order, Elena received a call. Not from Dalton. Not from the police department. From Daniel Price. "Ms. Rivera," he said, voice quieter now, "Caleb is safe." Elena's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back all day. "Is he okay?" she whispered. "He's shaken," Price said. "But he's safe. And because you filed that report and held your ground today, we got there in time." Elena closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Price paused. Then he said, "There's more." Elena's breath caught. "More?" Price's voice was heavy. Internal Affairs is opening an investigation into Dalton. But County Council is also reviewing whether there was a broader network of interference. Elena's stomach tightened again. Price continued, "When someone feels comfortable enough to threaten a teacher in public, and then call a caregiver to move a child, it's rarely the first time they've tried it." Elena's skin went cold. Price's voice softened. "But today it stopped." Elena swallowed hard. "Good," she said, voice shaking. Price hesitated again, then added, "Ms. Rivera, you should know, Officer Kim wants to thank you too. She said your calmness made it impossible for him to twist the story." Elena let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "I teach 5-year-olds, she said softly. Staying calm is part of the job." Price's voice warmed slightly. "Not everyone could have done what you did." Elena looked down at her phone, the same phone that had captured the moment Dalton's confidence cracked. And she realized that the Glovebox object didn't save her because it was powerful on its own. It saved her because it connected her to a system that, when forced into the light, had to respond. And it saved Caleb because Elena had done the hardest thing a person can do in a moment of unfair power. She stayed steady. She insisted on the procedure. And she refused to be intimidated. Now here's the question that should make all of us pause. If Elena hadn't recorded, if she'd panicked, if she'd tried to argue emotionally instead of calmly, would Dalton have opened that envelope? Would he have found the address? Would he have made the call sooner? And would CPS have arrived to an empty house? That's the part that sticks with you. Because we all like to believe the system works. But the truth is, the system only works when regular people, teachers, nurses, parents, refuse to let it work in the shadows. So I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to see your answers in the comments. Do you think Elena did the right thing by recording and demanding a supervisor? Or do you think she should have stayed silent and just complied to get home safely? And here's a harder one. What should happen to an officer who interferes, directly or indirectly, in a child safety investigation? Suspension? Termination? Criminal charges? Because if you ask me, when a child is involved, mistakes aren't just mistakes. They're consequences. If you made it to the end, you already know why this story matters. So before you go, tap like if you believe accountability should apply to everyone, no matter the uniform. Subscribe if you want more stories where the truth comes out and justice actually gets served. And comment the moment you think Officer Dalton realized he'd gone too far. Was it the glove box? Or when CPS showed up? I'll be reading the comments, and I'll pin the most thoughtful takes. Because stories like this don't just entertain us. They remind us what fairness is supposed to look like.